Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 series, Rescue the Rockies. And the 2040 offseason still about to get underway. Did our annual roster review following a World Series victory last episode. This episode, we're going to continue planning for the offseason, also take a quick look at some of our former players, some of our top prospects in baseball, do our annual review of our farm system. But we're going to begin by talking about a couple of decisions that we have ahead of us where we've already gotten some feedback from the worldwide scouting department to think about. Since the last time we checked in, you can see we've made offers to several, actually all four of our arbitration eligible pitchers. Explored longer-term potential deals with Hoffmeister, McKinney, and Reyes, the excellent young starter, and then the two relievers. Actually, I don't know how young they are. They're all 27, as you can see. But they were looking for really big money. David Guadron not looking for as big money, but the former first-round draft pick is probably not someone we're ultimately going to be building around, so we'll continue to go year to year with him. Also decided to bring back Phil Dingwell, a bit expensive, close to $7 million with what we offered him ultimately for what he is at this point, which is a good defensive outfielder who starts against left-handed pitching and is a platoon guy with Eric Mokeen next year, and then a kind of fourth outfielder against right-handed pitching. But we've got money. We can afford to bring him back. We did ultimately make a long-term offer to the young second baseman, Johnny Castillo. He's now played 4 years in the majors, coming off the worst of those 4 seasons, by far, quite honestly, in terms of his production. But only 26 years old at this point, still 2 more arbitration years ahead of him. It's going to be expensive, but we've offered him a somewhat front-loaded contract, not feeling like we're going to have a ton to do in free agency this year with the way the team looks and not a lot of holes to fill. So pay him a little more for this upcoming season and then a contract that pays him a bit less in the future, which hopefully will make it a little more palatable to us down the line when we do need to re-sign Kevin Roberts Jr. to ensure that he hopefully spends his entire career in Colorado. So we'll see what happens there with Castillo. Otherwise, we're not going to make an offer to Chris Roy, who has been with us and away from us and in the majors and primarily in AAA over the last several years. Still some decisions to be made. Talked last episode how between Jason House, Trent Kaysen, Jarrett Woods, several young infielders, most notably Alex Gomez and John Jefferson, that we've got a lot of talent in the infield right now and we might need to get rid of somebody. So still kind of considering the trade market, and we'll talk about some options there shortly. But if we're able to trade away an infielder or two to fill some other holes on the team, that may prevent us, obviously, if we trade one of those players away from making an arbitration offer to them. And then still thinking about what to do with Doug Hall. He did a really nice job for us last year as our platoon catcher, playing primarily against left-handed pitching. Put up a 113 WRC plus, a WAR of close to 1. Started 50 games for us. He is still a productive hitter against left-handed pitching. The issue is the $12.3 million that he's expected to get next year is a bit much for a guy that's going to have less than 200 at-bats. We probably can't afford to do it. And I think, as we'll talk about shortly when we look at the best trade opportunity that I could come up with to maybe do something different, think that it's probably the right decision to ultimately make an offer to Hall, but haven't made any final decisions there yet. And we do have an option year decision on longtime center fielder Anthony Pack Jr. Was kind of leaning towards this being a option or an option that we would decline. Still love his speed, still love his effectiveness in the outfield, but he's going to be 34 years old. He's fragile physically, and his offensive production has steadily gotten weaker over the last couple of years. Both Ravenspawn 3 and Patrick DeBonis felt it's probably time to move on from him as well, and I think that's where I am too. Patrick did mention perhaps seeing what he's looking for after we decline the option and maybe bring him back as a fourth or fifth outfielder for less money, which is certainly something to consider. So we're going to officially void the last option year for Anthony Pack Jr. And my hunch is he probably is looking for a little less than $9 million a year. Just a little less than $9 million a year, looking for $8.5 million for 2 years. I don't know that that's a number that I want to hit right now, because with the buyout we had, we'd end up spending more on him next year than we would have. Might be a situation where we let him hit free agency. If someone's willing to give him $8, $9, $10 million a year, best of luck to them. If he lingers on the market, we haven't found a fifth outfielder, and he's all of a sudden willing to go for $4, $5, $6 million for a 1-year deal. Maybe bring him back. That would give us a little bit of insurance in center field, and would also give us a left-handed bat off the bench, which is something we haven't typically often had in recent years. And I mentioned last episode that a backup catcher, a fifth outfielder, and a left-handed reliever were kind of the three things we felt we might want to do some work on this offseason. Backup catcher, basically looking for someone who's above average defensively, that's not a total embarrassment at the plate. You can see there's about a dozen players who meet those criteria. The most interesting to me was Alan Bagar, catcher from the Mets, 28 years old, headed into his second arbitration season, set to make about $2.8 million. What I like about Bagar is that he is better defensively at this point than Mr. Hall, at least in terms of his blocking and framing, although his arm isn't as good. And he is a guy who, like Hall, is better against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed pitching, so he would fit in well as a platoon player for us alongside J.D. Lee as our starting catcher. But ultimately, the cost for him in a trade is pretty high for a guy who, although he was a starter for the Mets last year with 92 games started, 322 at-bats, and an above-average offensive season, a 2 WAR, basically have to give up one of the top players on our roster to bring a guy who we're envisioning as a catcher who's going to start 40 or 50 games for us next year. So the price there seems somewhat elevated to me. I'll show you the best deal that I have come up with, and honestly, it's not that great a deal in my opinion. The best I could come up with if we wanted to bring Bagar on as our backup catcher for Doug Hall was to include Doug Hall in the trade. As I mentioned, Bagar is better in terms of his blocking and framing. Hall has a better arm. Hall is actually a little bit younger, even though he's more expensive heading into his final arbitration year. And Hall is actually a better hitter against left-handed pitching marginally. So we save about $10 million if we trade Hall for Bagar, but given that I don't necessarily think there's anywhere we're going to want to use that this offseason, not sure how important that is. Now we are almost certainly moving on from Hall after the 2041 season if we keep him, whereas Bagar would still be under our control, so there's some advantage there. But given that we are now the defending World Series champions, expecting to be competitive again, I don't know that downgrading and getting older from Hall to Bagar, and then also having to include Sean Heilman, former fifth-round draft pick, who doesn't really look like he's going to become a big-time pitcher for us, but still has some potential. And then Ted Slade, the platoon first baseman slash DH for us, who was a pretty productive offensive player last season. Included him because he doesn't really have a spot we love him at defensively. He does play for us only against left-handed pitching, and we do have that log jam with too many infielders, so that would help clear up the infielders. But when this is the best trade I can do and we're a win-now team, and I feel like the cornerstone of the trade has to be downgrading for next season a little bit in terms of the catcher that we have, at least offensively, and including additional assets, I don't think it makes sense. Would love thoughts from the worldwide scouting department, but after kind of reviewing the options out there, my thought is that running it back with Doug Hall next year for around $12 million in his final arbitration season, even though it's overpaid for what he is, does give us a little bit of insurance if J.D. Lee has an injury, and hopefully keeps our team as productive as possible without just trading a bunch of other resources to bring on a guy who's going to probably make it slightly more difficult for us to win next year. But would love competing thoughts and opinions if there are any out there. And the other roster hole that we've been looking to fill offline since our last episode is the left-handed reliever. Right now we are envisioning only two left-handers in our bullpen, the outstanding Jason McKinney and then David Guadron, who's more of a long reliever for us, who we talked about earlier, arbitration eligible. We're almost certainly moving on from Adonis Valer, our longtime lefty closer who tore his rotator cuff and is still looking for over $20 million a year for 4 years this offseason. But as you can see, if we're just looking for a lefty reliever who's in the majors right now, whose stuff is a little above average and movement and control are average or better, not a long list of options to choose from. The most interesting is certainly Roberto Ramirez of the Kansas City Royals. Was an all-star for the first time this past season, even though he's been working more as a setup man than a closer for them the last 2 years. Has outstanding stuff, definitely a reliever with that 30 stamina, but a great fastball, a great curveball. He's really a guy who's very effective against both lefties and righties, so not necessarily a lefty specialist. Heading into another arbitration season for him, expected to make about $4.5 million. The issue, as you might suspect, is that very expensive for him to pick up in a trade. But the one option that is interesting to me, that I'd love some thoughts from the worldwide scouting department, is whether we trade Trent Kaysen for him straight up, given the excess infielders that we have. Kaysen, over the last few years, has typically been a starting third baseman or first baseman for us, particularly this last year when he started 132 games. 24 homers, 91 ribbies, 104 WRC plus, a WAR of close to 2. Outstanding defensive first baseman, a really good defensive third baseman, can also play second or short for us in a pinch, so he is a versatile right-handed hitter who's a good offensive player. At this point, over the course of parts of 6 seasons in the majors with the Rockies, he's put up a 112 WRC plus. But he is a guy who's heading into his final arbitration eligible year, set to make $8 million, which if he plays the way he has for us is certainly a more than reasonable price. But he's going to be 29 years old, probably with some of the youth we have not going to be someone we look to re-sign. When we think about the infield, Johnny Castillo, especially if we sign him to this long-term contract, is going to be our second baseman for years to come. Shortstop Carlos Bear Barrel Davila made his debut this year. He's got another 5 years before potential free agency, so he's plugged in at short. First base and third base are a little more uncertain, but between Juan Silva, who we traded for before the trade deadline this past year, Jason House, Jarrett Woods, who's coming back from an injury, Derby Mahez, who's signed, and then some of the youngsters like Alex Gomez, John Jefferson, feel like even if we moved on from Kaysen, we've got enough infielders to manage those positions pretty well next year. Did look at guys other than Kaysen, some of the other infielders we talked about that we might be more willing to move on from, like a Jason House, like a Ted Slade, and they're pretty insistent, which I can understand with a player like Ramirez that they want a pretty good player in return. Although I think it's a little hard to argue that an everyday player like Kaysen, who, as we noted, just hit 24 homers and 91 ribbies and has been a well above average offensive player through his major league career, I think it's hard to argue that a lefty reliever who's probably going to pitch 60, 70 innings for us is worth the same as somebody like Kaysen. But Ramirez does appear to be a very high-end lefty reliever. 119 ERA plus and an 84 FIP minus over the course of his career. I think with our good defense behind him, can probably be even better than that, pitching for us in Colorado. And given that we've got so many infielders right now, although I think it's probably too high a price to pay, I am, unlike the trade for the catcher, thinking that I might be willing to trade Trent Kaysen away, since I don't think he's part of our long-term future, to bring the lefty reliever on board, knowing that, or thinking at least, that we've got enough depth in the infield to handle the loss of Kaysen without it being a significant issue. So anyone who's still watching and listening at this point, and we do appreciate that, if you've got thoughts on this trade, would love to hear them as well. And now that I've talked about some of the things we're thinking about for the near to medium to long term as we start moving through this offseason in the next episode, we'll check in on some of our former players, some of the top prospects in baseball, and do our annual review of our farm system and share our initial thoughts on the player development lab for this offseason before we move on. A couple of our former pitchers just retired. Orlando Morales, the former IAFA signing, traded him away a few years ago. He pitched 3 games for San Diego this year before deciding to retire at the age of 27. And Andrew Painter, a longtime, very important member of our team, was with us all the way through 2036. Acquiring him really helped jumpstart the dynasty that we built. He never was really a number one starter for us, but as you can see, was a consistent contributor in our rotation for over half a decade, so an important part of the team for us. Actually retired 2039. Maybe I forgot to take him off the list last year, although maybe that's something that didn't happen right at the end of the season. But regardless, Painter finishes his major league career with a 107 and 97 record, WAR of close to 20. Most of that production done with our Colorado Rockies. Gregorio Olvera, who we traded away to Colorado a couple of years ago, or we traded away to Florida, Miami, I guess technically a couple of years ago. 4-8 record with a 3.76 ERA for them in 26 starts. He's been a solid 2.5 WAR kind of pitcher for the Marlins, although he, unfortunately for him, hasn't really won a lot of games pitching for the Marlins. And then Dan Patterson, last but not least, former prominent draft pick of ours. Looks like he's now with the Diamondbacks after Detroit waived him. Still a solid-looking right-handed reliever. Did actually start 9 games for the Diamondbacks, worked 37 out of the bullpen, 5-9 record, 4.62 ERA, a win above replacement. He was a guy who, for a time, we thought might become a ace of our rotation. Ended up moving on from him several years ago at this point, and he's become, at this point, a bit of a journeyman. As you can see, he's been with the Mets organization, the Salt Lake organization, Arizona Diamondbacks organization, and the Detroit Tigers organization over the last 2.5, 3 years. Check in next on a few of our former position players. Tev Rumler and Kevin Raymond, who were both part of the trade with Atlanta that brought us Bob Russell, continue to be pretty productive. Rumler, the batting average fell to .225 this year, but still at 22 homers and 70 ribbies with 14 steals in 115 games started. 109 WRC plus for the first base / DH / corner outfielder. Kevin Waymont, now with the Detroit Tigers, hit .304 with 19 homers and 62 ribbies for the Tigers this year. They claimed him on waivers from Atlanta. Never really understood that move by the Braves a year ago, but I guess they've got a stacked roster. But Waymont, with a 136 WRC plus this year for Detroit, remains a productive major league player. Jordan P. Contreras, once one of the top prospects in our organization, continues to have outstanding speed. Split this last year at the major league level between the 2 expansion teams that joined the league a couple years ago, Salt Lake City and Indianapolis, combined for 51 steals with just 5 caught stealings between the 2 teams. But his combined batting average was barely above the Mendoza line with a WRC plus in the 60s. Ted Miller used to be a key left-handed hitter in the middle of our lineup. Spent this year between San Francisco and the Philadelphia Phillies. .250 average with 12 homers and 43 ribbies for the Phillies and 336 at-bats. Put up a 118 WRC plus, so pretty productive. You can see he did walk 47 times for them. Even at the age of 31, his eye remains one of the best in baseball and is a productive hitter. Last but certainly not least, Gus Pex-Nieves has finally retired. Spent the final season of his major league career this year with Seattle. 4 homers and 17 ribbies and 106 at-bats for Pex-Nieves. Did put up a 126 WRC plus in the limited action he has, so that was the first time since his 2035 season, which is his first year away from us, where he was an above-average offensive player, albeit in a very small sample size. Pex-Nieves finishes his career 413 homers, 1,152 ribbies, and a 23.6 WAR. But still feel like when we moved on from him after his 7 years in Colorado, in which he led the league in homers and ribbies 4 times each, that was the right decision for us, although it wasn't popular with the fans. His WAR with us, 24.7, was more than his WAR for his entire career. So after he moved on from us, was a negative WAR player in both San Diego and Seattle over the course of those final 6 seasons of his career. Probably ends up being a very, very borderline Hall of Fame candidate. The 413 homers probably put him in the mix for consideration. Certainly leading the league in home runs 4 times in his first 6 years in the majors. Will get a lot of attention. Obviously, if he hadn't spent the first several years of his major league or potential major league career in Cuba, could have ended up a 500 or 600 homer guy, but 23.6 WAR ultimately, pretty unlikely that that's going to be Hall of Fame worthy for Pex-Nieves when all is said and done. We'll turn our attention now to some of the prospects we've thought about in the IAFA pools and recent drafts who haven't ended up on our team. The starting pitching prospect, Alex Mireles, who was picked 32nd overall back in 2037, just after we made our decision. Split the year between high A and double A with the Chicago White Sox organization. 2-2 record in 13 starts, ERAs in the 3 at both levels. Still certainly looks like he could be a good, solid major league pitcher if he reaches his full potential. Is fragile in terms of his injury proneness, but at only 21 years old, still on a potential path towards becoming a major leaguer. Andy Navarro, IAFA signing from closing in on 2 years ago at this point, still looks like he could be an outstanding relief pitcher with a potential to turn him into a starter if that curveball develops. Split the year between A, high A, and double A. Combined 3-3 record between those levels, was used out of the pen at double A Wichita for the Minnesota Twins organization. But ultimately was pretty effective in his longest stint in high A ball, 3-1 with a 3.11 ERA and a WAR of close to 1. Still certainly looks like he could be a very effective major league pitcher, and he's not even 19 years old. Probably the last time we'll check in on Phil Davidson was a reliever who thought about drafting, and he ended up getting picked before we could select him. Spent 19 games this year in the majors with the San Diego Padres. 1-2 record with a 3.81 ERA, was slightly below replacement level when you look at the stats as a whole. The 8 home runs he allowed in 28 1/3 innings, probably a significant part of that. A good, solid, right-handed major league pitcher at this point. Does throw over 100 miles. Nothing more, nothing less. He's got a great fastball. Everything else about him is kind of average-ish and does struggle with his control a bit, although 8 walks in 28 1/3 innings this past season, not bad at all. But as we talked about, the home runs were the issue for Davidson this past year. And we've got a longer list of position players to look at. Led off by the left fielder Saul Bellow, 20-year-old, was an IAFA signing closing in on 4 years ago in early 2037. Bellow, the number 1 prospect in all of baseball, split the year between high A and double A, 289 average with 5 homers and 21 ribbies in double A for the Oakland Athletics, or I guess at this point the Las Vegas Athletics organization. Bellow, likely going to be starting next year in AAA as a 20-year-old. Still looks like he could be an absolutely awesome offensive player. Great personality and influence in the clubhouse. Good, solid corner outfielder. Is fragile physically, but certainly still somebody that looks like he's going to be a very productive major leaguer if he reaches his full potential. Center fielder Danny Betancourt, number 16 prospect in baseball, also out of that loaded 2037 IAFA class. Spec Betancourt made it back up to the majors this year after a brief cup of coffee a year ago. 1 solo home run in 19 at-bats across 8 games for the Royals. Did hit .243 with 17 homers and 51 ribbies in AAA. While those numbers don't jump off the page, we have to consider that he was 20 years old while putting up most of those numbers in AAA, and likely had just turned 21 when he got his second cup of coffee with the Kansas City Royals. Still looks like he could be an outstanding defensive player, great influence in the clubhouse, really good speed, and a bat that can definitely be special, although similar to Bellow, he is potentially fragile in terms of his injury proneness. One guy who's not fragile, the 19-year-old first baseman Carlos Espinoza, IAFA signing from 2031, still potentially off the charts, home run power and eye. The question is making contact and striking out. but he moved all the way from high A through double A up to triple A this year for the Pirates organization, combined for 17 homers at the three levels. The batting average is not great, and he struck out 184 times over those three levels, so the concerns we had about him are still relevant, but certainly looks like he can still draw a walk and hit a home run. Third baseman Danny Pantoja, IAFA signing from back in 2035, spent the entire year in the majors with the A's and had a really nice season. 289 average, 37 homers, and 105 ribbies. A sparkling 164 WRC plus and 6.2 WAR for Dudu Pantoja, who was named an All-Star for the first time this year. Based on the numbers he's put up, would have to think he'll be in the mix to possibly be a Silver Slugger as well, and looks like, based on his ratings at least, that he's probably a pretty good defensive third baseman. So Pantoja has developed very well. Center fielder Luis Rivas, IAFA signing from 2038, the number 23 prospect in baseball. Happy of Manayunk is his nickname, and he made it all the way through A, high A, and into double A this year. 258 average with 5 homers and 20 ribbies in double A. Did have 19 doubles and a triple, so some pretty good gap power. Stole only 6 bases, probably can do more than that when he gets to the majors, and at not even 20 years old, already having had a productive season in Double A, the expectation is certainly that he will be in the major leagues at some point. Center fielder Adrian Nelson, second-round pick from the draft in 2039, made it up to Double A this year, although his primary part of the season was spent with the High A team in Peoria. Still looks like he could be a pretty interesting hitter. Gap power, home run power, and eye could all be well above average. Like his durability, and looks like he could be a solid corner outfielder when all is said and done. Shortstop Alberto Limon, also known as Pringles, IAFA signing from 2038. Really liked his glove, and the bat still looks like it could be interesting for a player with a glove as good as his. Spent the entire year in Double A with the Montgomery Biscuits in the Southern League. Hit just a .176, but again, this was as a 19-year-old in Double A. Seems like the AI general managers are a bit more aggressive than I typically am in terms of moving teenagers aggressively through their organizations, particularly with the fact that he hit only .221 in high A as an 18-year-old the year before. But the Rays organization managing Pringles the way that they think is appropriate. We'll see what happens with his career in future seasons. Left fielder Luke Martinez, second-round pick from last year's draft, hit .373 in A-ball after he was promoted from rookie ball, where he hit .377 in his first professional season. Still looks like Martinez could be a pretty solid major leaguer. Third baseman Jeff Chrisman, another guy who was a second-round pick in 2039. All of these guys a year and a half ago we were hoping might fall to us in the second round, but no such luck. Chrisman split the year between A and high A. Got a lot of action, over 400 at-bats between the two levels for the Salt Lake Trappers organization, but hit just a .191 in high A ball. But again, that was as a 19-year-old, so pretty high level for a 19-year-old to be at. Last but not least, the catcher John Galvez, IAFA signing from 2035. Spent the year between high A and double A in the Angels organization. Just 1 for 24 in double A. Does not look like Galvez bat is ever going to be anywhere close to major league quality, and honestly his glove as a catcher is not special either. Is a guy who's versatile and can play a lot of corner, infield, and outfield positions in addition to catching, but clearly that bat is going to be a significant limiting factor on his career. Probably will take him off of the list of people that we're going to continue checking in on, given that does not seem like Galvez is really going to have much, if any, of a major league career. And we'll now do what to me is more interesting than visiting some of our old players and some of the players who aren't in our organization, which is checking in on the players who are actually the future of this Colorado Rockies organization. Our farm system has definitely slipped back over the last year and a half, ranked middle of the pack, 14th out of 32 farm systems. You can see we do still have 5 top 100 prospects, but only 6 in the top 200. Top prospect in the organization now, Alex Gamez, the former second-round pick in 2036, the number 31 prospect in baseball. Spent most of the year in Double-A Hartford and Triple-A Albuquerque, where he was good to outstanding at both of those levels, and then we did promote him late in the season to Colorado. 228 average with 3 homers and 20 ribbies in 79 at-bats. Gamez at 23 years old is one of the reasons why, as valuable as Trent Kaysen has been for us over the years, might consider trading him for the left-handed reliever Roberto Ramirez, because Gamez, looking at his ratings and the fact that he did hit .332 in 217 AAA at-bats, probably doesn't have too much left to prove in the minors. He's 23 years old now, is fragile physically, and although he does have really good range, is probably ultimately not quite as good defensively as Trent Kaysen. But he is a guy who can play all 4 infield positions. We've also played him at right field a bit. His bat still has room to grow. Probably not going to have the same kind of home run power as Kaysen. But ultimately, when we think about Kaysen being a 112 career WRC plus guy, I don't think it's unrealistic to think Gamez could be an above-average offensive player too. A lot cheaper, and if we put ourselves in a position where Gamez could be playing significant time for us at third base next year instead of Kaysen, that's the type of move that could help us add the left-handed reliever Roberto Ramirez to the team. Nils Mensch, former IAFA signing, the number 33 prospect in baseball. You can see we were playing him in left field in AAA just to get him as diverse as possible in terms of some of the positions that he can play, since we know we're kind of an outfield short in the majors, which, given the way our outfield and our prospects looked 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons ago, is a little surprising at this point. But eventually, if you keep trading off all of the surplus, there's no surplus left. Ultimately, though, Mensch is a guy who's probably going to be primarily an infielder for us. High A ball, hit .298 in 382 at-bats before we promoted him to Double-A. He was not great in Hartford, hit just a .180 in 61 at-bats. Admittedly small sample size, but did strike out almost 40% of the time, which was not ideal. He was only 21 years old, though, in Double-A. Looking at his ratings, the contact and the strikeouts are potentially going to be the issues for him. But we still think the gap power, the home run power, and the eye could all ultimately get to above average. So happy to have Mensch continuing to move up through the farm system. Starting pitcher Orlando Preciado, a scouting discovery from back in 2036. Looks like if he reaches his peak potential, he could be a useful back-of-the-rotation starter. Spent the entire year in A-ball, where he was 19-0 with a 1.86 ERA. Struck out a ridiculous 207 batters. His ratings didn't really indicate he was quite ready for high A, which is why we didn't promote him. But given the fact that he's now spent over a year in A-ball with a 22-0 record, expecting that he'll be ready for high A beginning of next season, and hopefully even move on to Double-A after that. Probably not a cornerstone guy for us, but someone who could be a useful pitcher for us. Ezekiel Caban started the year in A ball with Preziato, and he did earn a promotion to high A. Combined 16-1 record between the two levels, similar to Preziato. Don't think he's ever going to be a superstar, but the former second-round draft pick certainly looks like he could be a useful back of the rotation starter if he reaches his full potential. Our fifth and final top 100 prospect, Makoto Hirota, another scouting discovery. Always important to invest that money in international scouting and have some scouts who are good at finding prospects for you. Looks like if he reaches his ceiling, he's probably the most interesting to me of these pitching prospects. He was 8-10 with a 4.09 ERA at AA Hartford, but most of that was as a 21-year-old. Don't love the low adaptability and baseball IQ. Don't love the outspoken personality. But he is still a guy who looks like he could be a pretty interesting pitcher for us. And we're going to continue trying to invest in his development. Gustavo Esqueda, last but not least. This was our international free agent signing focus in that robust 2037 class. We talked about some of the big prospects on other teams when we reviewed some of the top prospects in baseball that we didn't go for that year. Silent Jake Esqueda spent the year in rookie ball for us, hit 370 with 12 homers and 64 ribbies and 227 at-bats. He's now 20 years old. Ratings say he hasn't been ready for A-ball, but given his age and given the fact that he's now spent 3 years in rookie ball, obviously he's going to be in A-ball for us next year. The hope is that we can probably move him up towards high A before the end of the year. Still think that the gap power and the home run power could be well above average if he reaches his full potential, and a good, solid defensive corner outfielder who could also play center field, some positive personality traits. I think the left-hander Esqueda is still hopefully an important part of our organization. Check in on a few other players who aren't as highly regarded at this point. Carlos Sotelo, IAFA signing from 2035. Looks like he could still be a useful major league pitcher. Can throw 100 miles an hour. Ground ball tendencies. Don't like some of the personality traits. Was 12-3 with a 3.36 ERA in high A this year. He'll probably be in double A next year. Luis Escobar, our first-round pick from 2039, hasn't developed as well as we would have hoped. Hit just 248 for us this year in Double A, although he did have 17 homers, 77 ribbies, stole 16 bases, 23 doubles, 4 triples. So although the batting average was not great and the strikeouts were high, he did do a fair amount when he made contact in terms of extra base hits and impact on the base paths. So we did promote him up to Albuquerque late in the season, hit 222 in 27 at-bats with a solo home run, was basically a league average player. Escobar, not a great defensive player, but similar to some of the other young infielders we've talked about in the organization, a guy who can basically play any position, could also play a more than competent corner outfield for us. Still hopeful that he's going to have a slightly above average major league bat, although at closing in on 24 years old, we're getting to the point where we're going to need to see some more significant development and production from El Capitan before he'll be ready to help us in the majors. But again, having someone like Escobar not too far away, another reason why maybe we do make that trade of Trent Kaysen. Steve Guillory, former third-round draft pick, 17-2 with a 3.11 ERA in high A this year. He'll likely be in double A next year as a 22-year-old. Michael McCottrell, former first-round pick from back in 2037. His career really hasn't developed the way that we hoped. Did hit 363 and 323 respectively in A and high A. But he's almost 22 years old. The home run power is going to be brutal. We were hoping that the contact and the gap power potential would be able to overcome that, but certainly questionable at this point, but continue to hope that maybe we see a little more from Wito McCottrell as the years move on. Mario Manriquez, our second round pick from back in 2039, split the year between high A and double A, hit 300 or better at both levels, combining for 25 home runs. Another guy who can play every position in the infield, although he's limited defensively compared to some of the others, but ultimately think his bat could be interesting. 22 years old, so he's more than a year younger than Escobar, and the hope is that he could be helping us in the infield in the not too distant future. Last player that we will check in on is the right fielder Tom McNeil. He was a fourth-round pick back in 2038, split the year between A and high A, combined for 14 homers and 86 ribbies at those two levels. The 21-year-old still looks like a outfielder who could certainly help us down the line. Left-handed hitter, respectable defensively, good influence in the clubhouse with that high work ethic. And although he's not going to hit a ton of home runs, we think he can be a decent contact hitter with really good gap power. So still hopeful that McNeil may be someone who could help us down the line. And we'll finish things up with our initial thoughts on what we're going to try to do in the development lab this off-season in the 8 spots that we use. Mike Witherspoon, who was a 5th starter for us this year, former first-round pick, going to work on secondary pitch improvement with him. Think that we can hopefully help him take another step forward in his major league career with a successful result there. Justin Denmark Morgan, going to work on improving the arsenal of the former first-round draft pick. Question exactly how much we're going to get out of him at this point, almost 24 years old. If there's someone that I may pull from the development lab in favor of a different option, Morgan is probably on the short list of guys who ultimately might not get a spot, as I consider different options offline, and hopefully some feedback from the worldwide scouting department as well. Alex Gomez mentioned could definitely be a scenario where he's our starting third baseman next year if we move on from Trent Kaysen. We've got him working on generating bat speed to hopefully increase his home run power. Carlos Barrel de Villa going to work on hopefully tapping into some of that untapped gap power for our shortstop of the future. Eric Schweitzer, going to work on secondary pitch improvement. His slider is already incredible. If he can make that cut fastball even better. This is a guy who we anticipate being our closer in the post-Adonis Valaire era, and want to make sure that we invest in him. Recent draftee from this past draft, Angelo Toco Lopez, the third-round pick out of Sacramento State. Sure, Ravenspawn 3 will be happy to see this, but he's got the stamina to kind of be a 5-inning guy. His fastball and his slider aren't too far off major league quality. We think he can reach 100 miles on the radar gun. Have high expectations for Toco Lopez to become a useful reliever for us. Pitched 5 games for us in high A and double A after he got back from the draft league. If we're able to get lucky and add a third pitch to his arsenal, might be able to become a productive major league starter rather than a reliever. Mentioned Marquis Mensch earlier, going to work on his plate discipline, try to teach the young infielder to hopefully have a better eye and draw a few more walks. And same thing with our first-round pick from this past year, Trent Nath, sluggo out of Southern New Hampshire University. Hit 311 in 90 at-bats in high A ball before we promoted him to double A, where he hit 304 in 46 at-bats. We ultimately think he could be very good at drawing walks. Love the durability, really like the blocking and the framing and the influence in the clubhouse. Are ultimately concerned about his contact and the number of strikeouts he's going to have, but hopefully if we can offset that with a really good eye and a bit of home run pop in the bat when all is said and done, Sluggo Nath, perhaps within the next 2 or 3 years, could become our everyday catcher in the majors. So I'm still thinking about some other options. There's clearly guys that we talked about who are prospects like Mario Manriquez, as well as Mr. Escobar, who we may want to get into the development lab instead of some of these guys. As I said, I think the one I'm probably most potentially going to move on from is Justin Morgan, simply because I just don't think the ceiling on him is high enough to justify a spot at this point for a guy who's almost 24 years old. He was a first round pick just 2 years ago out of Louisiana Lafayette. The changeup hasn't done much in terms of development. Was 5-8 with a 5.69 ERA in AAA. Did make his major league debut at the end of the year for us. So there's part of me that wants to keep investing in the sunk costs of the former first-round draft pick. But when I look, unless we get incredibly lucky and that arsenal, specifically the changeup, improves, it's hard for me to think that Morgan's going to be anything more than kind of a swing starter or long reliever for us. And there might be someone whose future is better served by taking that spot in the development lab. So a lot to think about. Covered a lot of ground. Appreciate any thoughts from the Worldwide Scouting Department on some of the trades that we talked about, options in the development lab, anything else as far as some of the arbitration offers that we made and what our plan should be for the off season. At this point, I think I'm leaning towards having Hall back as our catcher rather than making that trade. I think I'm probably leaning towards trading Trent Case in a way to bring the left-handed reliever Ramirez on board, as that would really round out the bullpen that's been so great for us over the years and kind of give us a natural replacement for the outstanding lefty Adonis Valaire as he gets too expensive into his 30s and potentially more injury prone. So we're likely moving on from him. But appreciate any thoughts from the Worldwide Scouting Department. Next time around, we're going to make some decisions and start moving this offseason forward. Find out if perhaps the likes of Kevin Roberts Jr. or Leo Martinez will win their 4th MVP award or 4th Cy Young award, respectively. So the offseason will get underway next time around. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.